This is part 2 of me talking with Pop, Herb Luther. Today is December 27th. Herb Luther the first, yes, one of the many herbs. Last time yesterday we spoke about some about your parents' immigration here, how your parents met, some about a little bit about your early childhood, the importance of church in the neighborhood and religion, and where you lived in Brooklyn, and the Borkarts, how you met them through there. And maybe we can talk if there's anything else you remember about your dad's diary you had mentioned, how you found your dad's diary, and then maybe we can, spend the next 45 minutes or hour talking some about, your own youth and about, up to where, you gave birth to many children and, how that was.
I don't know if I told you that my father was a very competent person, but he had a fear of something. And I found when I read his diary after his death, at 19, he was saying that he didn't know if he would ever be able to provide.
Right, you
for a
mentioned that.
family. And that was really, I think, something that was ingrained in his thought, because he was a workaholic about his work. He'd bring some of it home for Gertrude and I to do, small things. But I felt, well, my mother and father, in those years, most people didn't have an awful lot of education in that level. I think both of them had about 8 to 10 years of school. But my father, I felt, was...
So through 8th grade or 10th grade, you think?
Yeah. My father, I thought, was a very educated person. And if I had to judge where he got it from, he was an avid reader of the New York Times.
You mentioned that.
And he really studied it like crazy. And he had a profound knowledge of so many things that most people who go through a classic education I don't think had. Because when the Depression came, and Gertrude was a very brilliant girl, went through high school in 3 years, and went to Hunter College at that time. It was a wonderful college for women in the city, and she zipped through it with A's all the way through and finished ahead of time. But my father had for example, when the Depression came and he and my mother, I guess, I probably was my mother, put money in, a little money, and they didn't have much, into United Cigars and Schulte cigars. And as contrasted to today, the stock was zero. You go to cash it, there was no money. It was a surprising thing, because Ruth, who I subsequently married, had a fellow who was sick. They found he had TB, and they said you had to go to Saranac, and he had money in the bank. You go to the bank.
No money there for the Depression.
There was money there, but the bank was closed.
No.
People couldn't get the money they had out of the bank.
So your parents had invested in the cigar company, and they couldn't, and the stocks were valued at zero when they tried to sell it.
Yeah.
And so how else did that affect you guys? How old were you when the Depression hit?
I was 15, I guess.
You were 15,
14,
so you were at Brooklyn Tech, right?
I thought,
You were at Brooklyn Tech?
yeah, I was at Brooklyn Tech, and I had an unusual education, and I was trained rather than educated in the classic sense. I always say that sarcastically internally.
Yeah?
But it sounds good externally, but I really feel it externally. Because Gertrude, on the other hand, was an excellent Greek and Latin and everything, and I had 10 periods a day for 4 years, and 18 years of chemistry and physics in high school. Never a language, never. And then my father said, well, you ought to try Cooper Union. Well, he knew Cooper Union very well, his background, Peter Cooper, etc. And eventually I tried at his suggestion. And then I got a job in Sunshine Biscuit. No, first I worked on Wall Street for...
Actually, let's go back a little to the Depression before we hit your career. So you were 15, the Depression hit. How did it change your plans when your parents lost their money from the investment and the Depression hit?
Yeah. Well, I guess I wasn't thinking too much of my plans. Probably my parents were thinking more. And my father had suggested you ought to try for Cooper Union, which didn't mean anything to me, and unfortunately didn't mean much to the guidance counselors in school, because a lot of them that I seemed to know about it.
Even at Brooklyn Tech?
Well, no, that wasn't at Brooklyn Tech. I mean, yeah, that's true. Brooklyn Tech probably would have known it.
Huh.
And I worked on Wall Street in an insurance company, and marine insurance, did average adjusting, which was interesting. But I wrote about 110 letters around because they had gotten in Cooper, and they had said, try to get a job in the daytime.
I got it.
Try to get a job in the daytime in the related field. So I wrote.
This is during the Depression, right?
Yeah. And I wrote around to everybody that was in geographic. And I got a surprising number of answers. And
Of positive responses.
yeah,
Okay.
well, not necessarily positive, but they were kind in their answers. And who answered them in some instances? But one thing I found out that I hadn't realized, the educational, the intellectual level of the Cooper graduate, that people were so much above the average. Because my number was 5,286. And there were many after me, and they took 200 at night. So you can see the paring down and the selection.
I'm confused. You were 5,286 in what ranking?
Application.
Oh, just the number of applications, right. So there are tons of applications for 200 spaces, so very competitive.
That's right. Well over 6,000 and I was. And
do you think that there were more applications during the Depression because Cooper Union was free?
there were more in the Depression because there were many people, third year, Yale, Princeton, and Cooper said, okay, take the test. If you score, then you have to take year by year. In other words, I could start in the first year, I could start in the second year.
They have to start all over again. But
So,
the Yale people wanted to come because it was free and it was the Depression and they couldn't afford Yale.
And there was no such thing as you took everything in the first year, everything in the second.
Right.
Because in Cooper, again, there was something like 94 or 6% technical subjects. Essentially no language, very little cultural, economic history, but that was not really. And but one thing that I was amazed at, because at night school at Cooper you didn't mix with anybody, because I started at work at 6 a.m. and then I'd go to school, to Cooper after, and I'd get home about 10 minutes at midnight. So that was every day.
Wow.
And
6 a.m. to midnight.
Then you're supposed to do homework and stuff.
Right.
But one of the things that I was amazed to find, I got something like 80% of the letters I wrote, I got answers. And there were a lot of Jewish boys at night who got in but couldn't get jobs. And they write letters and they wouldn't even get answers.
Because they were Jewish.
And I didn't realize that because they would, and I showed them the letters. And there was one, I think the Guggenheims or some rich Jewish family owned, and I got a letter signed by one of the Guggenheims or whatever the name was. And these people, and I had never realized that it was discrimination, but these very, very brilliant boys couldn't even get a job. And it shocked me because I was totally unaware of it. But there was a horrible discrimination then, but that was back in the 30s, and we've come along because I remember years later I was in Hoffman LaRoche and I saw one of the fellows I went to night school with. His name was Kaczynski. And I said, "Hey, Kaczynski!" And everybody looked around and looked at each other. His name was Carr because they all, so many of them changed their names.
He changed his name so that people wouldn't be prejudiced against him for being Kaczynski.
It was a standing joke at that
Wow.
time about how people went to a judge and he wanted his name changed. He said, "What is it?" And he said, "Murphy." And then he said, "Well, what do you want?" "I want Jones." And he said, "Well, what do you want to change from Murphy to Jones?" He said, "So when they asked me what my name was before Jones, I could say Murphy."
Because everyone assumed that you changed names?
Yeah, oh,
Wow.
it was very, very. And, I mean, I hadn't realized that there was that much discrimination.
Right.
But being in the middle of it, I could see this, and it was surprising to me because it wasn't part of my thinking or the knowledgeable experience. But that was a very, very profitable experience for me. And the intelligence level of the Cooper people was, because I'd gone to NYU, Poly, Columbia, NYU, and I've seen the others, and the Cooper fellows were always.
What was your BA in when you got it there? And what kind of engineering?
It didn't get a BA, it was a BS,
Yes, okay.
chemical engineering.
Chemical engineering, BS.
But Cooper had a very unusual, because I know Bob Warnick went to Columbia, for example, and about 45% of the subjects were technical. In Cooper, they were 96, and no language. But there were many, many, many. I enjoyed it tremendously. And, well, I had lots of fallout. We had, for example, a course in metallurgy, and I was very interested in it.
How they
I
got it?
have it.
And I followed it carefully subsequently. And then Sunshine Biscuit Company, they were,
All right.
I'll call him back.
You call back? Okay.
they had ovens of
Colleen is into
new ones, experimental Dan ovens that went like hell ago, about a city block long,
Yeah, that's
transferred from one end to the other in 3 minutes. So it was very, very rapid, and they had some
And what was this? I'm sorry, I missed it.
pan ovens,
Ovens.
in which the
At
biscuits,
Sunshine.
yeah, were
Okay.
placed on a tray, a moving band that went at a terrific speed. And 3 minutes it was all over. But they had some of the old ones where they were put on a pan, and the pan went in circular fashion over the open fire. And after one rotation, they were baked, and there were people standing, scraping, and half of the biscuits stuck terribly, so they had to have 2 men scraping. And they were studying these in the laboratory, and they obviously hadn't had any metallurgy or hadn't read very well. And they were analyzing, and they were getting nowhere. Because obviously, if you knew some metallurgy, if you took and polished a sample, you could tell from the number of darks and what the carbon content of the steel was just from looking at it. But I said, could you give me two trays that stuck and two that didn't stick? And that's fine, and they gave them to me. I cut little squares and polished them, and in about 2 hours I came back, and this happens to be the one, and you could see the crystals were all squeezed and elongated as compared to the center. And this shows
And this is a good or bad one?
that was a good one.
Okay, I don't know if you
No.
can see on the camera.
But,
Yeah, actually you can.
well,
There you go. This is the bad one?
no, this is a
The
good
good one, I'm sorry. Good.
And two of them were good and two were bad, and the two that were good had these squeezed crystals near the surface, and they went much further. There's a called a Newman line. If you concentrate on this, these will have special lines in them. And I went back to him and I said, oh, it's simple. All you had to do is ask for cold rolled steel for the pans, not hot rolled steel.
Okay.
And K.D. Luce, the president of Sunshine, had followed it for years, and they weren't getting anything. He was very thrilled with that. But I was earning $18 a week at the time.
Still during the Depression?
Yeah,
This is while you were getting your BS at
yeah. And
Cooper.
he said, he got the man in who made the band. He said, now, this fellow's found the answer to our problem. And now that you know it, you're going to be able to give good bands to everybody. I want you to give him $1,000, which he did.
Just as a bonus.
Hmm?
Just as a bonus.
Yeah. But
Okay.
not, Sunshine didn't. He made the man who had made the metal pans. He made the metal pan man give me $1,000.
Out of his own salary?
Out of his money. He was a company who made pans and sold them.
Okay.
Now he said, now
Okay.
you know the answer. Now we know the answer.
Yeah.
Now you're going to tell everybody else. He said, I want you to give this fellow $1,000.
That's almost 80 weeks of salary, right?
It was over a year's salary.
Wow.
Did about 2 hours.
Pretty incredible.
And they had lab people with doctorate and everything else.
Right.
They weren't metallurgists, and they never approached the problem. And there's an example of training rather than educating. Didn't have languages, I didn't, but I learned an awful lot. Then later on in the company, there was the war, and
World War II?
they couldn't get fats, and they couldn't, they had to conserve things, but they didn't want crackers to hell with those. And a fellow, Elliot Brownlee, who was the head of their flour production unit, was a brilliant and a wonderful fellow. He said, if we could convert this flour to sugar that we use in baking, he said, we'd be able to produce a hell of a lot. And everybody laughed at him, the sugar chemist and Sunshine laughed at him. But he was there for about a week, and we talked about it. And I took a great interest in it. And on his suggestion that we can make sugar out of the flour, I worked up a process, and it finally came where I had rooms several the size of this, where we had 4,000-pound dough troughs of flour, and we took just the water that we would use in making the dough, make a slurry out of this, and first I added a lot of hydrochloric acid, which takes the starch and breaks the strand and makes maltose, which is 1/3 is Swedish sugar. And then in 24 hours in these hot rooms where I rigged the thermostats and did everything myself. They let me do anything because, they could solve it. And after 24 hours, then I bought some maltase. It's a enzyme that converts maltose to glucose.
Mm-hmm.
And I poured that in and gave it 24 more hours. And I rigged up an analysis, a gasometric, so that I just put them in 24 bottles, put them on a shaker, and just measured the amount of gas that came up. First time I measured it with one yeast that only took maltose, so I get so much and I know. And then I changed it and put the second yeast and the gas would come in. And I was able to get 95% conversion.
Wow.
And,
Of the original flour water.
And then there was something that I didn't, so this worked beautifully. They were almost free of sugar requirement. So then, one thing I didn't realize, the enzyme that I bought from Norman Haas had a little protease in it, an enzyme that will work on protein. Now, flour is about from 7 to 20% protein, depending on whether you're making soft flour for cookies or hard flour for dog food. And once something happened and the band ovens weren't going, and these dough troughs that were ready to go were getting more and more liquid. But they were getting soft and mushy. And then when I realized the protein in the flour, when it was mixed with these other things, it was still okay. But when it stood for a long time hot and was held up, it started to digest the protein of the flour. And this was fantastic because then I could also reduce the fat because to make the biscuit tender. So I worked like crazy on that and was able to keep a couple of plants going just by use of that in about a year because I worked like crazy on it. And it was fantastic. And then one day I went to get my paycheck and I got it and I handed it back and said, "You made a mistake." And it was twice my salary. And I said, "This is a mistake." He said, "No." I said, "This is 2 weeks instead of no, it's every week." The man who had the idea was to Katie Luce, president, and they doubled my salary. I think at that time I was getting $25 a week, and they made $50 a week.
Wow. That's
Now,
pretty incredible. And you
didn't come to me and say, "Herb, you did it fantastic." They
Right.
just doubled my salary, and that was the way Brownlee was. He was a gentleman and a scholar.
He didn't come and try to get credit for it.
Yeah, but I mean, he appreciated it.
Which is pretty amazing considering that you still hadn't gotten your BS by then, right? You were still in the process of undergraduate,
That's great.
and you were getting paid in the Depression a pretty high amount, right? Wasn't $14 a minimum at the time per week?
Well, when I was working on Wall Street, Franklin Delano Roosevelt came out with his NRA, National Recovery Act.
Okay.
And
During the Depression.
Yeah, this was about 32, 31.
1932.
32.
Okay.
And he said, anybody who's working 40 hours a week has to get $15 a week salary.
Okay.
And the big company handed me $14 a week. And I didn't get on my hind legs and bitch, nor did anybody else, presumably, at that time, because they were so damn happy to get anything. But they gave me $14 a week.
So they gave you $1 less than the minimum wage that FDR
And
required.
I was working about 60 hours a week,
Wow.
and they said that was for 40. But I didn't get up and scream, and presumably nobody else did.
Yeah.
But it just showed a difference in when you're poor and hungry,
During the Depression.
what you will take and be thankful for.
Yeah.
But these two things I always kept that K.D. Lou said to him, you know, now we know the answer, you know it, you're going to do it for everybody. I want you to give him $1,000. And he did.
He showed his appreciation.
Yeah, but I mean, he made a hell of a lot more because
Money.
the two people no longer were on
Right.
the thing 24
Right.
hours a day. Those two people, I
Uh-huh.
saved two people's salary
Yeah.
for several years.
And a lot more higher quality.
Yeah, but I mean,
praise.
this was using your head, you know, and it shows to me the difference in education in a sense, because I turned while I was getting my BS and working like a dog, I doubled my salary and, you know, got another year's salary. And, well, the first time I didn't do much, I knew enough metallurgy. And I made up a nice metallurgy book where I went through the literature. And I had in my rat lab, because my first job was in a rat laboratory where I was doing nutrition studies with about 800 rats, all of whom I know their requirements for thyme and riboniacin, iron, etc. And so I was doing that, which was interesting work, but it wasn't related to the other things that I did. But I think I had my mind going. And the things that I did, I wouldn't have been able to do if I hadn't gone to Cooper. If I'd gone to Columbia, I wouldn't have had metallurgy.
Right.
You know, so when I
It's very
say
practical.
but it's practical and theoretical too, because you know, there's theory involved in one of those things, and so I never felt that I was deprived by being trained instead of educated.
I mean, having more of a scientifically based education and training rather than liberal arts. So let's go back to now. You took 8 years to get through Cooper, right? Night school, working during the day. You worked at Sunshine, and then you went on to get your master's and your PhD. Could you describe the master's and PhD and what they were in?
Well, the work I did on conversion of the flour to sugar, I thought was interesting. And mind you, I had been doing actual research in rats for 10 years, you know, so I'm not a novice in the field. You know, I know the goal, I know how to get there, I know what are the parameters. So I was a hell of a lot different. So I started at NYU following up on the starch conversion. And see, I having had no languages when I wanted to get a master's at Poly. Now why I wanted to get it, I don't know. You look today.
Master's in what?
Further along.
I mean, in what?
In education, in anything. Sciences I was going
Were you
to.
looking for a master's in chemical engineering?
Well, I
at the
was
time, or
looking
civil?
at chemistry, I mean, science
Okay.
rather than. And I went to Poly, and the fellow who interviewed, who was head of the physics department, he said, "Oh, you went to Brooklyn Tech, huh?" Somebody knew I had no language. He said, "And then Cooper Union?" I said, "Yeah, I'm proud of it." He said, well, you're going to have to take 20-some credits that you won't get credit for, and, you know, just so that you round it out.
Of languages,
Language or whatever.
liberal arts. Okay.
I said, thank you very much. I said, goodbye. He said, where you going? I said, I'm NYU. They only require one language, and I'm pretty. So, okay.
And you knew German. You were
I knew
familiar with
German.
German.
Well, you see, the language requirements there are different. You have to be able to translate technical material. You can even have a dictionary, but if you have to use the dictionary with any frequency, you know, you could never pass it. So I got my master's in NYU, and I calculated, I did the work such that I could not have to be away from home. It was only, you know, once I took, during the war, they
This is
were
while getting your master's or PhD?
masters.
Okay.
Same thing.
At NYU?
And what did I work on? You can work on. I said, well, they were in the war. They were doing a lot of dehydrated foods, so that you could ship them to the soldiers, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And I was working in a lab where I could do what I wanted as far as food stuff. So I spent a 36-hour stint in which I took carrots and I cut them up and I air dried them. I vacuum dried them. Well, I did air and vacuum at work, and collected the data, analyzed them for everything, and developed what the heat requirements, what the cost, and so this was very practical information, because the Quartermaster Corps of the United States Army was extremely interested in it. And so I did that, but I mean, it wasn't new research. But what I did, I analyzed the different drying procedures, their efficacy, their cost, their time, what it did nutritionally, because I was doing rat assays, and so I couldn't measure a lot of this myself. And everything came out correctly, except riboflavin, and riboflavin is supposed to be heat stable. And riboflavin wasn't heat stable in the drying area. So then I took the samples and I bioassayed them in rats. And see, so I had a hell of a lot at my disposal, what I was doing all of the time. So I got my master's at NYU, and there was, nobody looked at it before or after, and, you know, it was, but
Meaning that you didn't
I
have
didn't
an
have
advisor
somebody
who
said-
specialized in it?
no, he didn't, because he didn't know from Shinola about it.
So what was it, a master's in then?
Chemical engineering.
Chemical engineering, okay.
Because that only required one language.
Gotcha. And then for your PhD, was it
Then-
chemical engineering too?
Then I was interested in what I was doing on the flour, and I was continuing that as,
Turning that into sugar.
and then Brooklyn Poly comes out and says, only in the field of chemical engineering we will allow you to use only one language. So I go back to Poly, and same fellow, head of the physics department. And he said, I don't know if you remember me, but you told me that even to get a master's, I'd have to take 20 credits that won't count for me. Yeah. I said, does that still hold? He said, we can forget about it.
Just forget about it.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
I said, I got a master's and I've started on my doctoral.
Right.
He says, we can forget about it.
You're psyched to have a good student like you, and
Let me see what they did in those language exams. They want you to be able to translate technical. Now, translating technical in your own field isn't too bad if you know the subject matter and you know enough of the words.
right.
And McGraw-Hill puts out a series of translation books, 1, 2, 3, 4 in German. And in the 4 books, They take you from beginning technical translation to detail. And I bought a copy for 17 cents, Krankheit des Speiserherde, sicknesses of the esophagus, and I translate, just myself too. And so I became fairly proficient in translating technical German. And you could use a dictionary, but if you had to use it frequently. But the McGraw-Hill series of 4 books listed all of the technical words in terms of frequency. And so you had in the beginning of it all of the technical terms in decreasing frequency of use. So it wasn't a dictionary that you could.
It's whatever was most frequent you could find. So you had to take a test in order to get into a proficiency test in order to complete your requirements in language. Is that the deal?
Which was
German, technical German.
And they handed me a copy of Mode of Action of Anesthetics in German. Medical, purely, Christ. But I bowled through it, and I don't know, I failed it. But knowing the technical words and knowing, I could do a fairly good job.
Okay.
Not polished, but I could get the content of it.
Okay.
So,
Let me see how much time we have left, just in the tape. 36. Okay. I want to make sure that you may have to go a little bit quicker over your career, getting the PhD and where you worked. And then I'd like to hear a little bit more about, development of your family, and more details
so
of
that, for example, on my doctoral thesis, I dictated the last 100 pages
with your dissertation.
to Ruth, just
Okay.
right to the machine. Nobody ever said that should be we and so were.
That was when there were typewriters, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the book is an excellent technical treatise.
And
But-
Ruth is Nanny, who was your wife, right?
Right. But it isn't like Ed goes over them with the polished English and say this.
He is a word processor, yeah.
And nobody ever,
Oh,
I don't
right.
think anybody ever looked at it. It's about 300 pages of a tremendous amount of
So
technical.
none of the
things.
people on your dissertation committee really reviewed your work.
No. And
in
what I
detail.
told them, I said, I was looking as an antioxidant. And I wanted an antioxidant that, if you could develop it, would pass through Food and Drug Administration. And so I indicated the things that FDA would require.
So you wanted to make it a practical outcome from your dissertation
Right.
so that FDA would approve it soon after you completed it.
So I took those compounds that would be considered GRAS, generally recognized as safe. I took benzoic acid, took ascorbic acid, be an antioxidant, and the benzoic would allow it to get into fatty foods as well. So I took salmon, and the benzoic would allow some transfer into little more than the surface, the ascorbic, and I went through everything that FDA would require. And it was, it was a treat, and I had been working with FDA for years, so I knew that. And these people, they didn't know what the hell I was talking about.
So what was the outcome of it? What was the product that you could get approved by FDA in the ad?
Ascorbyl benzoate.
And that would help do what?
That would be an antioxidant that
Okay.
would work on aqueous and slightly fat soluble.
So what's the benefit of an antioxidant?
It, for example, if you were to take an apple and cut it in a little while, it would be brown. It would stay white.
Okay. I've
And
seen you do that around the house, actually.
Yeah, well, it's the same.
So it stops the natural, let's say, rotting process or aging process of
That's right.
foods. It delays it, it slows it down. So that
And
would,
it delays it through a highly nutritional additive.
ascorbic acid was a
Yeah.
nutritious additive.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So that,
Were you able, okay, so you got your PhD when? Do you know? When did you get your PhD?
Well, about
defended?
56 or something.
1956. By then, how many children did you have?
4.
Okay, so you had all 4 by then. Now, remember you telling me about how you worked at having experiments run while you went home to your kids and you went back later at night to
Yeah.
finish running them for your dissertation.
All of those things in the doctoral thing, I would run hours during the night, and it didn't take me away from home.
Okay.
Because when I went to the Poly, so I had a department, he said, well, I have a couple of good projects. One with some copper company that wanted to do something, and that would take me. And then he had another one for something else that he was a consultant to. Another one he was a consultant to, but I would have had a fourth one. I said, no thanks, no thanks, no thanks, no thanks. And he said, what do you want? I said, I think I'd like to do something on antioxidant juice. Okay, get out of here.
You go do it on
And
your own.
I never saw him 1 minute
Huh.
from the time he said, do what you want.
So you did it without an advisor, without a mentor,
Absolutely.
independently.
But I knew what I was doing.
Right.
I knew what the government would want, and the data in there would have passed.
Because you've been working in the field for a while. Okay, so in 56 you got your PhD, and then
Well,
where
what
did you
had
work?
happened, I worked in the rat lab, and then I got a job in Pfizer. I went around and I said, well, I've been in this field 12 years. I want to now do something else. And I rode around, and I got in the neighborhood, and the neighborhood was Pfizer. And I was interviewed by the president of Pfizer, who was a Cooper Union graduate, and the executive vice president, Poly, and they hired Poly students like crazy because they could take them, and they're as good as any bachelor in analytical chemistry. They're even better. They weren't looking to be the moon, and they wanted to hire me. But then he said, now, because I said I had done this fermentation research, and they're made 97% of the world's citric acid by fermentation.
Pfizer did.
Yeah. So they said, well, what are you planning to do? I'm going to get my doctorate and take some more courses. And Poly gave a course in industrial fermentation. And it had a funny history. The guy who taught it was with the government, and the fellow under him in the government that was working on citric acid fermentation was hired out of the government by Pfizer to work for Pfizer. And I think between us girls, that's where they got their knowledge of citric acid, was from this fellow Curry.
Huh.
He never worked again. He was retired as a young fellow, probably millions and millions, stay the hell away. And the fellow in the government who was his boss hated Pfizer. And he said, well, what are you planning to do? A couple more courses, I'll get a doctorate. And what do you think I'd taken? And I said, one was industrial fermentation. And it was the boss of the man who he said, you can't take that. And I said, what? He says, we won't let our people take that. Are you going to tell me what courses I can take? Yeah. And highlight. And so then he said, well, we would want you to sign a contract that you wouldn't work with anybody in this field for 30 years. I said, is that legal? He was out in front.
There was a committee of people interviewing you.
Just the president
Right.
and McKean, who was the
Okay.
executive vice. Now, you see, I told you in Cooper they had to stop giving courses at night. And I said, who were the people? He said they were mainly foreigners, immigrants, and first and second generation. And the head of Pfizer was an immigrant, came from Germany at 15, and went to Cooper.
Huh?
You know, he said, why didn't you come here sooner? Because I was poly and analytical work, and
Right.
I
So
said,
he expected you to come to Pfizer sooner.
I said, I did. What do you mean you didn't? Yeah, I said, I applied for a job, and I was told that they weren't interested. I said, what? And this was 12 years before. He said, who did that? And for some reason or other, I remembered the man's name. Now, I may have checked up before I went in, but I knew the man.
So this man is upset because you weren't hired earlier and they had turned him down, and he wants to figure out who did not hire you earlier.
And he said, who? I gave the guy's name. He says, how? And he was, can you tell me how somebody wrote to you 12 years ago and you can tell me his name? I said, well, maybe it was because the only penny postcard I got from any company.
As a rejection.
He said, what? Picked up the phone, got this guy on the phone, reamed him out.
Yeah.
You sent penny postcard. You know, it says right on it.
Right.
But nothing. But, I mean, that's the kind of a guy, that president, you know, he would,
Okay.
how can you tell me 20
So how long did you work at Pfizer?
I worked there for 25 years.
And what was your title by the
I
end?
started in technical service, was the problems of all, and then I was given all the nutritional and other problems in tech service. And then one of the things I noticed, pigs, you know how they...
Okay, keep on
so-
talking, I'm checking our time. Okay, we're gonna have to just get basic information on your career, because I wanna make sure we get your family too.
Mhm. But I saw the pigs were killing
Okay.
them by laying them, and I said, there's gotta be
The
another way."
pigs, the mom pigs were killing their kids by laying on them.
And so I got pigs,
Yeah,
put them in our living room in Brooklyn, and pretty soon Ruth said, can't stand that. And I put them in the cellar, then in the garage, but I raised pigs
uh-huh.
on synthetic milk. And that,
Without the moms, because the moms were killing them by laying on them.
and that turned out to be one of the most, it was in Life magazine, Centerfold twice.
You were on Life magazine, right? The cover?
Twice.
Twice.
Twice the Centerfold.
For creating synthetic milk.
And
And pictures of you holding the pig babies and feeding them, right?
Well,
With bottles.
I had one with Helga feeding him.
With Helga when she was your secretary.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And so that turned out to be a fantastic thing. And
Okay,
for
so-
Pfizer,
It did well for them
Oh,
financially.
God.
So what was your position by the end at Pfizer?
Then I was director of research and development in
Okay.
Pfizer.
At Pfizer. And then when did you go to Hoffman Larash?
Well, the United States government each year has the World Health Organization meetings, and so they called me and they asked two from Pfizer, the director of research and myself, because I'd worked in the field that they had. And I was in Geneva for 2 weeks on this, and when I was there, I had two people come, and they just wouldn't let me go. You have to come to Switzerland.
Ah.
We have somebody waiting to see. Well, what the
With
hell
what
is
company? Who said this?
Geigy.
Guy, okay.
And I said, you don't know anything about me. He said, that's our problem, not yours. And they wanted me, now let this sound, he said, we don't want to quibble. Anything you say is what we're going to pay you.
So they wanted you to leave Pfizer and go to Guy.
And we don't want to quibble about money. We're not even going to discuss it. You tell me how much you want and you have it. Now, can you imagine talking to a vice president of a big company talking to you like that?
They wanted you to move your family to Switzerland.
It's up to you. We have a house for you. You can bring your family. You can commute because they owned a big part of Swiss Air.
Uh-huh.
You can commute and come over, but we don't want to quibble. We don't want any. And it was so shocking to have.
Right.
And so I worked there
For Geigy.
Yeah.
For how long?
It was 5 years, but in the last year, Geigy and Siebel were merging.
Okay.
And then Siebel and the others merged, and now it's one big. But I was for Geigy, and Siebel was merging.
So you lived in Switzerland for 5 years, or part-time?
I commuted.
Okay.
I
And,
crossed the Atlantic 19, 20 times a year.
wow. And then you worked for Hoffman LaRoche
Then
as
I
head of
worked for-
international research? Okay.
And I became director of research in one of their research areas in Hoffman LaRoche.
Okay.
And I was there for 12 years.
And you were working on pharmaceuticals at that point?
Pharmaceuticals and everything,
Okay, nutrition and
nutrition,
pharmaceuticals.
pharmaceuticals.
Animal nutrition
Mhm,
and pharmaceuticals for humans and animals? Both?
mhm.
Okay. And when you retired, were you at Hoffman?
I was at Hoffman, and they kept me 5 years later as a consultant.
Oh, okay.
So I ended and then Ruth had a stroke.
And you stopped working?
Mhm.
Okay. Maybe you could tell us some about how you and Ruth or Nanny met and where that was.
Gertrude had a series of girls that used to come mainly to our house in Brooklyn. Sigma Alpha Gamma, and Fran Little was in it, Ruth was in it, Gertrude was in it,
This was in
Marie
college?
Ehlers was in it.
College?
Yeah, they were about
Sorority in college?
about graduating seniors, or were graduating.
Of college.
Yeah.
So Ruth was at Hunter with,
No,
Kurt.
Ruth wasn't in Hunter. Gertrude was going to Hunter. Fran was, I don't know. But they
Okay.
met at often in our house.
okay.
And, well, Ruth was 3.5 years older than I, but there was something about her that attracted me very much. But I stayed, I kept my peace. I was going to school at night. I wasn't.
You were at Cooper at the time?
It was something at the
Okay.
time. And, but for some reason or other, I was mesmerized by her. And
Mhm.
it was a long distance. No one ever knew it, but Gertrude told me later on that she told Ruth that my kid brother's in love with you.
How old were you then?
Oh, I'm about 20 or something.
Okay. And how did Ruth react, do you know?
I don't know, I guess favorably, but I came home from school one night, it was midnight as always, and they had a masquerade party in our house in Brooklyn, and it was the sorority that Gertrude, Sigma Alpha Gamma. And I came home, and they were dancing, and I loved to dance. So I went upstairs, took my clothes off, took a big sheet, got a pin that you used to take your laundry, pin it up with,
Okay.
and I came downstairs in a diaper.
As a New Year's baby. Was that it?
And
That's great.
I danced with Ruth, and the other guy who just sat there.
Her date didn't
Yeah,
dance.
he was Russian.
Uh-huh.
But it was, I was mesmerized by it. For years I had seen it.
Well, how would you describe her? What was she like?
I think I was too mesmerized to have a good physical description. No,
Yeah.
she was very nice.
So, but what's so special about her?
I haven't any idea.
You can't put your finger on it why
was
you loved
just-
her?
It was, she was nice, pleasant, good-looking.
There are a lot of nice,
attractive.
pleasant, good-looking women out there.
Yeah, but
though.
it's strange. I can't tell you why.
Huh.
And I didn't have I hadn't been going around, so that I could pick this and that. I was busy.
I think it was like a chemical reaction.
I guess so. I
Chemistry
really
between the two of you.
don't know how I could describe it.
Huh. But now, I mean, you know her now. I mean, over time, certainly you got to know her and her personality. What was it about her personality that made her so well loved, do you think?
I guess that's hard to describe what made me love her, at a
Yeah.
distance, and retain that distance, never, ever.
Even later, it's like, I think, my mom describes her warmth and, her being a very attentive, loving mother for her.
No.
And, respecting her interests. She was very different from you in that she was interested in fiction and Russian authors, and
No.
in particular, we can look upstairs, there's Solzhenitsyn and Nabokov in your library that she collected
Well,
over time.
you see, I've had little time for that. My life has been,
Yeah.
all when I was in Terre Haute, I'd be out on the farm, research. I started from nothing with a staff of 105, of whom 35 had doctorates. Now, that's a pretty good group.
High percentage of doctors.
No, but I mean,
So you're saying you were working very hard and so you didn't have time for
yeah,
things like
I
that.
really have been deprived of time.
So you met her and you guys fell in love, and then you got married. How old were you then when you got married?
I got married in 38. I was about 24.
Nanny didn't
and
go
she
to college,
was
right?
27.
Okay, sorry. 24 and 27. Nanny didn't go to college, right? And you got married. Oh, I see a beep. 1 second. Oh. It's like we got 5 minutes, if not a little less. Okay. And how soon did you have the children after your marriage?
2, 3, 4 years, I guess.
Okay.
4 or 5 years. Yeah.
4 or 5 years.
And then every 2 years we had a kid.
Every 2 years. All right, starting with
Except
Joe.
Herbie we filled the backyard up with girls before we had a boy.
Okay, so Joe, and then Ellen, and then Molly, and then you waited a little time for
Herbie.
Okay.
And that was a fantastic experience. I mean, I was very, very close to the kids. I can remember Ellen when I would come home. You know, I'm going to get my day work done before my father comes home. And then she did it, by
She
a
wanted to get her work
formula.
done before you came out.
And I take the formula and I said, all right, now we're going to start reasoning out how would we do it if we didn't have any
Right.
formula. The teacher doesn't want it that way. I know how the teacher wants. Let's just draw a picture of what it is
Not
and
the picture.
figure it out.
Don't draw the picture. She didn't want to take the time.
No, but she said the teacher doesn't want it that way. She wants you to use the formula. I said, let's see how it would work out. We would develop the formulation and use it. And then there would be a total understanding rather than just substituting A and
So
B. And
you were very involved in their education.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And, okay. So let me see if there's anything
And
else.
once I remember Joanne was doing something of a fish, and she had it all drawn, but it was in pencil, and I tried to go over it in ink, and it's got to the middle of the night, and in the middle of the night I drew a fish. Inside. What's the fish doing?
Because you were so delirious
I
but
was-
tired.
Somehow or other, I drew a fish in the middle of the pig.
That's funny. So you guys lived in Brooklyn. I know Mom was born in Brooklyn, right? Was Molly born in Brooklyn?
Well, we were actually in Maspeth. Ruth's mother had cancer, and I converted her house from a one family to two. I put a kitchen and stairs and heat in. and we knew she was dying.
So you could live with Ruth's mother and take care of
And
her.
then we lived there, and then moved a half a block away, and when we had more kids, so that it, wasn't
Okay.
so hard on her. But I wanted Ruth to be able to be with her mother while she was dying, and
then,
it was
I'm
very
sorry.
rewarding, to have been able to do that.
How many years did you live with her?
Oh, about 3 or 4. We knew when we heard she came to me, and she said, and she was a very, very nice person, and I was surprised. She said, "Could you come upstairs a minute?" Sure. And she said, in the bathroom, and looked at a stool, and it was about this wide. She said, "This means something?" I said, "Yes." She had
What kind of cancer was it?
in the rectal area.
Okay,
Well, it was there and from other places as well.
right.
But I mean, she was so fastidious.
That was her
and
end.
take me up and say, "What is this?"
Yeah. She could tell that was nearing the end for her. And then from Maspeth, after she died, where did you guys move?
We moved to Baldwin for a little while.
Baldwin where?
Long Island.
Long Island.
And then went to Terre Haute
Okay.
when I commuted back and forth to New York with this big research. We started with a huge research area, and you see, during the war, the government had a bacterial warfare plant in Terre Haute and the fermentation plant, and they had an isolation hospital, beautiful, everything done in tile, for
Mhm.
non-communicable disease area.
We only have about a minute left, Papa.
And
Just a minute.
so we converted that into a research place.
Okay.
12 acres we had.
12 acres of it. All right. And then you guys moved to Manhasset, right?
Yeah, and I didn't like it there.
No, it was too snobby. And then you moved to Smithtown after that? To the Watts.
Well, we were there
To the
1
White House
year. I
next door
was
to the
going
mill.
back and forth so
1 year.
much. So in 55 or 6, I had that house and the other, and we were here for the best part of a year, but I would go
To Terre
back.
Haute?
Yeah.
Back and forth